Good afternoon. I am Eric Andrews-Katz. I am the author of 3 novels, including Tartarus, the gay fantasy. And today we are talking to Felice Picano, an author with more than 40 books to his name. His works have dealt with gay literature, both fiction and nonfiction, and his works explore gay life in New York City. Felice is a living witness to many moments in gay history, and welcome very much. Thank you for taking the time to talk.
Hi, good morning.
So you were born in New York State. What brought you to live in New York City, and at what age time frame were you when you moved there?
Okay, so I was born on Long Island, right? And my family used to go into Manhattan once or twice a year to go to Radio City Music Hall to see their spectaculars and whatever the big movie of the year was that was always shown there. And so I had a good sense of what Manhattan was like. And then when I was in my mid-teens, I started going into Manhattan on my own or with friends, and we would go to movies and plays and things like that. So I just got more and more familiar with going into the city itself. I moved there when I was 16 years old. I started college that year, and although the college was in Queens College of the City University of New York, I moved in with a roommate into what's considered Alphabet City in Manhattan. And we used to go to Queens College by several buses and subways.
Were you already aware of your homosexuality and the life in New York City at that time?
When I was 16, no, but I had a wonderful experience when I was 15. I went to see a movie at the 8th Street Cinema, which is 8th Street off 6th Avenue, Avenue of the Americas. And as I was walking back to the subway to go back to Long Island, these 3 astounding queens dressed up in full gear came past me, and one of them, I moved away to give them some room, and one of them touched me and said, "Poof, you're a fairy." And at that moment, I thought, not that I could be, and it was just such an amazingly magical moment there.
Transformative.
Yeah.
So how old were you when you became aware that you were gay?
Like 21, 22. And it happened in Europe.
In Europe?
Yeah, it happened in Europe.
When you came back from Europe, well, what was it in Europe that caused your awareness, your awakening?
Well, I was looking around in New York City, and I wasn't really crazy about what I saw of the gay scene there, which was not much, but which was we're talking 1960-ish, right? A lot of what I call fluffy sweater queens, who wore their hair much like Tracy wears her hair, and sort of page boys, and they wore big fluffy sweaters and things, and they were very feminine. I said, that doesn't interest me at all. But in Europe, I ended up in Italy, and with a group of American actors, and I was staying with them. I wrote about this in a book called Men Who Loved Me, and I was staying with them, and I was introduced to this film director, and that began my real gay experiences.
When you came back to New York City, how would you describe the gay scene? It's not what it is today. So what was it like then?
It had changed within a year or two. It was suddenly there was more than one scene. Leather bars had opened up. There were more young gay men and women my age around who were not fluffy sweater queens, but who looked like either hippies or they looked like 60s people that we ended up at Woodstock and places like that. So that 60s look was there, and there were just a lot more younger people to deal with. And they were specific crowds at that point.
What do you mean by specific crowds?
Well, there was the bar crowd, there was the leather scene, there was Twinkie scene, and the first gay discos began at that point.
How would you describe the gay life in New York City by oppression? I mean, it wasn't as open, definitely, as it was today. And I think a lot of people forget that it wasn't as freewheeling as it is today. So how would you describe the oppressive lifestyle of New York?
Well, there were two things I want to talk about. One of them is that it was a new generation of people who had gotten involved with anti-war things, and the Women's March on Washington. And so there were a lot of students living in New York City at that point. You could afford to do it. And so there was that whole scene and a 60s look scene, right? Both gay and straight, which had not been there several years before. And so I used to tell people one of the reasons why Stonewall happened when it did in 1969 was that young people were already used to protesting and used to demonstrating and knew how to do it from their experiences with the anti-war movement, right? And so the oppression took place mostly by closing bars. There were very few clubs. Those were very private at that time. So it really was that there were bars being closed. There were a lot more gay people on the street, period. Right.
Well, you talk about in your book, A House on the Ocean, A House on the Bay. You talk about how when you and your boyfriend there were kissing goodnight, you would always go privately, someplace indoors. Is that because you're just not a PDA kind of man, or is that because you could be arrested for doing things like that?
You could be harassed for doing things like, I don't know if you could be arrested for kissing somebody, but within 10 years, it had changed so much that people were openly affectionate on that same street, you know.
So let's talk about the night of June 28, 1969. Where were you when you first heard about the commotion going on at Stonewall?
I was across the street at a party thrown by a concert pianist named Jimmy Mathis, who was from Texas. And we got there and, you know, it was just an ordinary Saturday night. I stayed long enough to pick up the bartender. And so we left at around 1 p.m. And when we got downstairs, this is on the south side of Sheridan Square. When we got downstairs, these police, the whole scene was different from how I had left it. It looked like, I don't know, a meteor had hit Greenwich Village or something. There were police cars, there were fire engines, there were police everywhere. There were black fire hoses all over the square, and two policemen came to where we were up on us, you know, going down the steps, came up to us and said, we'll escort you away from, there's been incidents or something like that, and we'll escort you away from it. And they escorted us around the block. But I had spotted some people that I knew down at the other end of the street on 7th Avenue. And so I said to the bartender, whose name I forget, I said, let's go join them. We went around 2 streets and we went there, and there was this whole demonstration taking place.
What did you notice when you got there? What kind of demonstration? What was being done?
Well, all kinds of things were being done. We were being pushed away from Sheridan Square. But by that time, by 1 p.m. in the morning, there must have been about 2,000 people there. If and all the surrounding streets. And they kept on pushing the barriers that the police had put up on Christopher Street and on a couple of side streets too. And they were chanting and harassing the police, who looked pretty harassed. And in the middle of Sheridan Square, there were a Johnny pump, a fire hydrant had been knocked over. There were a couple of cars that were turned over, including a taxi cab. And the police kept on massing there. There's a lot of chanting. What do we want? Gay rights. When do we want them? Now. Okay. So that's what was happening. And that happened for the next 3 nights.
Yeah. I was going to say the riots went on for several days. How
Yeah.
long were you actually there? And were you ever concerned for your own safety that you might get arrested?
No, there were too many people. I mean, it was a big crowd and it was an angry crowd. And it was all young people, I mean, in their 20s, maybe a few in their 30s. It really was a massive group of young people. So I was not afraid of being arrested now.
What did you notice about the crowds? I mean, how has it changed through legend over the years?
Okay, well, one of the things that legend says, and this was a product of Stonewall 25, which was a 25th anniversary celebration of Stonewall, was all about the rainbow and how diverse all the LGBT stuff was, and how we owed all of our freedom to this group of Black and Latino drag queens, right? And that was all very nice, but it was not strictly true. A couple of years ago, I did an article for the former Harvard Lesbian Gay Review, which is just now. And what I did was I interviewed 6 people, including myself, about that night and in some detail. And I was able to connect with a trans person named Miss Majors, who was in the bar at that time. And what Miss Majors said was, she was in the bar, just winding down from the weekend, because it was a friendly place for trans people, which was true. And when the police came in and they raided it, the queens inside caused a commotion, and there were some lesbians inside too, caused a commotion, and they called for backup. The first backup arrived with a paddy wagon, and all of the people inside the bar were put into these 2 paddy wagons, including Miss Majors, who said, I was knocked on the head by a truncheon and people helped me inside there. And she said, we were all gone by the time it got to be really big. And we didn't find out about it until we got out of jail, essentially. So this answers questions that young people have been asking me for years. Why, if the riot was started by people of color, are there no people of color in any of the photographs that we see of masses of young people protesting and demonstrating? And that's because they were all arrested and off the scene right away. So it was the protesters were essentially white, educated, college-educated young people, 20 to 30 years old. And those were the same people who then met a couple of weeks later, a block away from the Stonewall in somebody's home. Actually, it was above a store. So it was above a storefront on Christopher Street, to start up the Gay Activist Alliance. No, to start Gay Liberation was the first one, the Gay Liberation Front. They're mostly white, college-educated men in their 20s, and a few women were there. And so that's what you see in all the photos. And that's how it's explained.
Would it be safe to say that the drag queens and the trans people and the people of color were the first ones to fight back, or were they just
Yeah,
the first
absolutely.
targeted to be arrested, as is such the case still?
And there were, as Mr. Majors pointed out, there were a lot of young hustlers who used to hang out at a bar down the street, and they were there in the park, and they helped provoke the fight with the police, right? But yeah, most of them were, that was the leading edge of it, but that's not what happened during the next 3 nights, because they were all in jail, until they could bail themselves out or get themselves out.
How accurate is the connection between Judy Garland's death and the actual start of the Stonewall riots?
I'd heard of that like a year later. It's not connected. Not at all.
When did you first notice a shift in LGBT rights and life after Stonewall riots? How long did it take to start actually taking effect?
Well, right away. I mean, the next day, I was called by Vito Russo and Marty, and
Vito Russo is the one who wrote the celluloid.
Yeah, they did a phone tree and said, meet us at the subway stations. There were 5 subway stations around that area of the Stonewall. It was still closed off. And we were there with signs demonstrating, picketing, so that everybody who came home from work at 5 to 7 p.m. and who got out of a subway were faced with these people walking around with signs saying gay rights now and chanting. So it happened the next night. Right, we were already organized to do that much.
How did it start trickling into the legal aspects of gay rights and the legal protection?
Well, for the formation of the Gay Liberation Front. And it was the Gay Liberation Front, which then morphed into the Gay Activist Alliance, right, which is a different group and a much more gay influenced group. And they started the parade a year later up Fifth Avenue, which was an illegal parade, completely illegal,
And how big would you say this first parade was?
Say what?
How big was this first parade?
It was very small. There were about 150 of us. The police were alerted that there were groups of people marching up Fifth Avenue, protesting with signs, and cars were stopped. And they actually came and opened up the street for us, because it started gaining more and more people. Maybe 150 people began at Washington Square. By the time we got to Central Park, there must have been 2,000 people or so.
Several years before, like 2 years before Stonewall, there was a big gay riot in Philadelphia. Was there any communication between the two groups after the Stonewall riot that you know
No,
of?
and there had been earlier protests and riots, one in San Francisco, maybe 4 or 5 years before, and also a big one in Los Angeles when a bar called the Black Cat closed. So there was no connection. I didn't find out about those until I went to Los Angeles and San Francisco, and we were told about that. So there was no actual connections, but they did happen. So it was in the air, right?
So those were the sparks, while Stonewall was the powder keg.
Those were the sparks. The formation of Gay Liberation Front as a political group by people who knew how to demonstrate and how to do essentially to act up against the police and the authorities. That's what got it really moving. Those other ones did not develop groups afterwards that were long-standing to continue the protest in various ways.
When people want to learn more about early gay life, and specifically this time period of history, which of your books should they pick up?
Which of my books should they pick up?
You were there. You've written
Probably,
many memoirs about the subject. So.
yeah. Probably Art and Sex in Greenwich Village is probably the best one because it shows that how a gay culture, gay and lesbian, bisexual culture was in fact developed over the years out of Stonewall. Because without that cultural construction, I don't think we would gay rights and LGBT life would have gotten to the point it has developed to at this point. There had to be a cultural background to it, so that people who were gay or wanted to be gay, who thought they were gay or had gay friends, could actually understand what was going on through theater, through books, and through various art that was being done at the time. And my book is all about how that happened.
At Stonewall, that particular time, it seems the LGBTQ plus community was more united under just one subject title. Do you think we're alienating ourselves by subdividing into so many groups?
Well,
or do you think that makes us stronger?
Right. One of the things you have to understand is that there were so few people out, or even halfway out in 1969, that in that parade, that when we went up Fifth Avenue, in a year after the Stonewall parade, I knew everybody in that parade. I mean, I really did. I'd met all of them at one point or another. And if I hadn't, within a week or two, I knew them all. And for many years, it was very easy to know all the gay people in New York City.
Despite it being such a big city.
Because there were so few of us.
Yeah.
So I think that just as more and more people came out and joined, through cultural events, and through the pride marches, and through the GAA started a clubhouse down in Chelsea, not in Chelsea, I'm sorry, in Soho, called the Firehouse, and they used to have meetings there, and then there were on Saturday night, and then there were dance parties afterwards, and a lot of people came into gay life that way. And so I think part of the diversification or deconstruction of gay thing is because so many more people are around, and it's impossible to have that cohesion that we originally had.
So one group, one name is not gonna, there's no umbrella name anymore. It's just
Right, there's no umbrella. The last time there was an umbrella was on the 25th anniversary, when there was the rainbow, right? But even that split off in many, many ways, because there were people who were not welcome in that parade. So ACT UP people were not welcome. There were various lesbian Avengers were not welcome. Boys and Men Together were not welcome there. That's why there was a splinter parade, and for that 25th anniversary. So even then it had started breaking apart. What
fire did the initiation of the Stonewall riots have that you don't think today's gay rights movement still possesses?
What fire?
Is there any kind of inspiration that they had or motivation that they have that you think doesn't exist anymore? Or is it continuing with good momentum?
Well, the people who are, the right wing, the conservative right wing, especially the radical right wing, go after the most vulnerable people that they are in any group. That's the way Nazism and fascism works. You attack the people that you think are easiest to be attacked. And right now they're attacking trans people, who are the most vulnerable. There are a lot of LGBT people who won't have anything to do with trans people. I know, gay activists from the 60s who are just not interested in them at all and really don't see how they're part of the group. And so that's who conservatives are going after at this point. And so I always look to who's being attacked to see who is the forefront of activity. And right now it is the trans people who are carrying the torch because they're the most vulnerable and they're the ones under attack across the world.
Whose work, novels, writing, fiction, including your own, would you suggest to the generation of today that really don't know what Stonewall was?
Well, that's interesting. Somebody was talking about my novel called Like People in History, which was published in 1995. And they're younger people, they're people in their 40s, right, and 50s even. And they say they read that book and they did not understand until they had read that book how gay life at that time was built around the fact that there would be protests taking place on a regular basis, and how that was how gay people got together, was in those protests, in those marches, in those demonstrations. And what gay life is like now is that it does not have that activism. And that's something I think that young people have to understand, that there was that activism taking place. But if you want to go even further back than that book to find out how gay life was, I always recommend City of Night by John. His book, John Retchie's book, showed what the life was like way before Stonewall happened, 5-6 years before it happened. And that's what gay life was like. So I would recommend those two books, that one of mine and City of Night by John Retchie.
Felice, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. You are definitely and definitively a piece of gay history living for us to learn from. And
Thank you.
I thank you very much.
And I recommend that people come to, if you want to see what gay culture is like today, because it is, at least gay culture is alive and kicking. I was at the Saints and Sinners Festival and Tennessee Williams Festival in New Orleans at the end of March. You should go there if you're at all interested in gay writing or theater or even in gay art. And also at the Rainbow Book Fair in New York City at the end of April, which was packed full of people, 3 floors. So we know that gay culture is alive and kicking.
Good. Hopefully it survives this current oppressive pushback.
Right.
Thank you very much again. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.